In the oppressive heat of a July afternoon in 2025, the air in Palm Beach clung heavy with tension. Officer James Hawkins, his uniform wrinkled and his face slick with sweat, stood on the pristine lawn of Mar-a-Lago, his gaze fixed on the man before him. Donald Trump, his signature red tie slightly loosened, exuded an air of practiced authority. The former president's expression was unreadable, his eyes scanning Hawkins with the detached curiosity of a man accustomed to power. Behind the wrought iron gates of the estate, the chants of protesters rose like a distant drumbeat, their voices unified in anger and demand for change. Hawkins, once a respected officer with 15 years of service, now bore the weight of public disgrace. Footage of him slamming a black teenager to the ground during a traffic stop had ignited a firestorm. The boy, Jamal Johnson, lay in a hospital bed, his father Malik at the forefront of a growing movement. The incident had become a flashpoint in a nation already fractured by debates over systemic racism and police brutality. Hawkins, facing criminal charges and abandoned by his department, had come to Trump as a last resort. To those watching, his presence here was baffling, but Hawkins clung to the hope that the man who once championed law and order might offer him a lifeline. Among the crowd gathered outside, Sarah Chen, a rising star in investigative journalism, stood with her phone in hand, her sharp eyes capturing every detail. She wasn't here for the spectacle alone, she sensed a story far larger than the one playing out on the manicured lawn. The whispers of corruption and collusion between law enforcement and political elites had long been on her radar. Now, as she observed Hawkins' desperate plea and Trump's enigmatic silence, she felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. Malik Johnson, standing stoic among the protesters, caught her attention. His grief and resolve radiated outward, a stark contrast to the disillusioned figure of Hawkins. The scene unfolded under a relentless sun, its rays bouncing off the estate's white facade with blinding intensity. Yet, the oppressive heat did little to dampen the energy of the protesters. Their chants of no justice, no peace reverberated through the air, a reminder of the growing unrest simmering across the nation. The scent of jasmine from the estate's gardens mingled incongruously with the raw emotion of the moment, creating a surreal juxtaposition. For those present, the atmosphere was electric, charged with the sense that history was being written in real time. As Trump finally spoke, his voice was calm yet commanding, cutting through the noise like a blade. His words, though measured, carried the weight of implication, leaving those around him uncertain of his true intentions. For Hawkins, the moment was a lifeline wrapped in ambiguity. For Malik, it was a reminder of the uphill battle he faced. And for Sarah, it was the spark that would propel her into a labyrinth of secrets and lies. None of them could foresee how this encounter would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond this sunlit lawn. What began as a plea for mercy would soon unravel into a saga of redemption, betrayal, and reckoning. The threads of their lives, Hawkins' search for atonement, Malik's fight for justice, Sarah's relentless pursuit of truth, would intertwine in ways none of them could predict. Beneath the surface of this singular moment lay the seeds of transformation, both personal and national. The stage was set, the players unwittingly bound together by fate, and the first act of their shared story had begun. The story unfolds in the vast expanse of era then, a world shaped by the clash of ancient magic and burgeoning technology. Towering spires of crystalline cities pierce the skies, their surfaces shimmering with the glow of arcane energy, while sprawling industrial zones churn with the hum of machinery. Between these urban marvels lie untamed wildernesses, dense, bioluminescent forests, jagged mountain ranges veined with glowing minerals, and desolate wastelands scarred by long-forgotten wars. The air is thick with tension as the balance between magic and technology teeters, threatening to plunge the world into chaos. At the heart of this world is Kale Draven, a brooding mercenary with a mysterious past. Once a promising mage, Cale was exiled from the Arcane Order after a forbidden experiment left him scarred and drained of most of his magical abilities. Now, he survives by taking dangerous contracts, his motivations driven by a mix of guilt and a burning desire to uncover the truth behind the experiment that ruined him. Cale's rugged appearance, marked by a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw and a mechanical gauntlet replacing his left hand, reflects the duality of his existence, caught between magic and machinery. Opposite Cale is Lyra Solon, a fiercely intelligent inventor from the industrial city of Valthar. Lyra is driven by a vision of a world where technology can coexist harmoniously with magic, a dream inspired by her late father, a renowned engineer who died mysteriously during a research expedition. Lyra's petite frame and unassuming demeanor hide a sharp mind and a stubborn determination. Her most prized creation is an adaptive automaton named Vex, a loyal companion and a testament to her genius. Despite her idealism, Lyra harbors a deep mistrust of mages, whom she blames for her father's death. The two protagonists are reluctantly brought together by a shared goal, recovering a stolen artifact known as the ethereal core, or relic said to hold the power to stabilize, or destroy, the fragile balance of Erethen. Cale is hired to retrieve the core by a shadowy client, while Lyra seeks it to continue her father's work. Their initial encounters are fraught with tension, as Cale's cynical pragmatism clashes with Lyra's idealistic fervor. However, as they delve deeper into their quest, they uncover threads of a larger conspiracy that ties their fates together. The supporting cast adds further complexity to the narrative. Among them is Saran Vane, a charismatic but morally ambiguous smuggler who has his own reasons for aiding Cale and Lyra. Saran's charm masks a troubled past, and his shifting loyalties make him both an asset and a potential threat. Another key figure is Maelys Vryn, a high-ranking mage of the Arcane Order who once mentored Cale. Maelys is a staunch traditionalist, fiercely protective of magic's dominance over technology, and her motives for intervening in the hunt for the core are shrouded in secrecy. As the journey unfolds, the characters are forced to confront their own prejudices and past traumas while navigating a world on the brink of upheaval. The interplay between Erethen's dazzling landscapes and its fractured societies sets the stage for a story of redemption, betrayal, and the enduring struggle to find harmony in a divided world. In the blistering July heat of 2025, a desperate officer James Hawkins stood before Donald Trump, pleading for intervention after his brutal takedown of an unarmed black teenager ignited national outrage. Among the crowd, Sarah Chen's sharp eyes caught a subtle exchange between Trump and Malik Johnson, the victim's father, hinting at buried truths that would unravel a conspiracy spanning power, race, and redemption. The small coastal town of Windermere was known for its serene beaches and tight-knit community, but beneath its tranquil surface, a quiet urgency brewed. Quinn Harper, a fiercely independent marine biologist, had recently returned to her hometown after a decade away. Her goal was clear: to protect the fragile coral reef near Windermere from a proposed industrial project that threatened its ecosystem. Quinn's determination stemmed from her late father's legacy as a conservationist, and she was willing to risk everything to honor his work. However, her return wasn't without complications. The project was spearheaded by Archer Cole, her childhood friend turned ambitious entrepreneur, who believed the development would bring much-needed economic growth to the struggling town. Their first encounter in years was tense. Quinn, armed with scientific data and a passion for preservation, confronted Archer at a town hall meeting. Archer, confident and pragmatic, countered her arguments with promises of jobs and prosperity. The clash of ideals was immediate and personal, rekindling unresolved emotions from their shared past. Neither was willing to back down, and the town's residents were caught in the middle, forced to choose sides. As Quinn worked tirelessly to rally support for her cause, she found an unexpected ally in Mia, a high school student and budding environmentalist who idolized her. Mia's youthful enthusiasm reminded Quinn of her younger self, and their growing bond added a layer of hope to her uphill battle. Meanwhile, Archer faced his own challenges. Despite his outward confidence, he struggled with doubts about the project. His father, the town's mayor and a staunch supporter of the development, pressured him to stay the course. Archer's strained relationship with his father mirrored his internal conflict, as he began to question whether the project's benefits truly outweighed its costs. His interactions with Quinn only deepened his uncertainty, forcing him to confront the possibility that his vision for Windermere's future might be flawed. These moments of vulnerability revealed a softer side to Archer, one that Quinn hadn't seen in years, complicating her feelings toward him. As tensions escalated, subplots began to emerge. Mia's involvement in Quinn's campaign led her to uncover a hidden connection between the proposed project and a series of illegal activities tied to Archer's father. This revelation added a layer of intrigue and danger, as Mia and Quinn debated whether to expose the truth. Simultaneously, Archer's younger sister, Lily, returned to Windermere after years of estrangement, bringing with her secrets that threatened to unravel their family's carefully constructed facade. Lily's arrival forced Archer to confront long-buried wounds, further straining his resolve. Through it all, the dynamic between Quinn and Archer shifted. Their heated debates gave way to moments of reluctant understanding, as they began to see the humanity behind each other's convictions. Old memories resurfaced, reminding them of the bond they once shared. Yet, the stakes remained high, and neither could afford to compromise their principles. As the deadline for the project's approval loomed, both faced critical choices that would not only shape their futures but also determine the fate of Windermere itself. The lines between allies and adversaries blurred, setting the stage for a conflict that was as deeply personal as it was public. The morning began like any other in the quiet town of Rivermist. The sun climbed lazily over the horizon, casting soft golden light across the cobblestone streets. Shops opened their doors, children darted off to school, and the hum of daily life filled the air. For Elena, a young archivist at the town's historical library, the day promised nothing more than the usual monotony of cataloging dusty manuscripts. But as she unlocked the library's heavy oak doors, she noticed something strange. A small, unmarked envelope slipped beneath the threshold. Its edges were frayed, its parchment yellowed with age, as though it had been waiting for years to be found. Curiosity tugged at her, and she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, bearing an intricate map of Rivermist. Yet, this was no ordinary map. It depicted hidden passageways and cryptic symbols, places that didn't exist, or weren't supposed to. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in hurried handwriting, were the words, "Find it before they do." Time is running out. The urgency of the note sent a chill down her spine. Who had left it? And what were they searching for? Before she could make sense of it, a loud crash echoed from the back of the library. Rushing toward the noise, Elena found the shelves in disarray, books scattered across the floor. A shadow darted past her, too quick to identify. Heart pounding, she called out, but there was no response. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. Among the mess, she spotted a torn page from an ancient tome she didn't recognize. The fragment bore the same symbols as the map, along with a cryptic phrase, "The key lies where the river meets the stone." The coincidence was too striking to ignore. Someone else was after the same thing, and they were willing to break in to find it. Elena's routine life was upended in an instant. She couldn't shake the feeling that the map and the note were meant for her, though she had no idea why. Her mind raced with questions. What was this key? What would happen if they found it first? And who were they? Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, she knew she couldn't simply dismiss the incident. She decided to follow the map's clues, hoping they would lead to answers, or at least some clarity. But she also realized she couldn't do it alone. She turned to her childhood friend, Marcus, a local historian with a knack for solving puzzles. At first, he was skeptical, dismissing the map as a hoax. But when she showed him the torn page and recounted the break-in, his demeanor shifted. "If this is real," he said gravely, "we might be dealing with something bigger than we understand." Together, they resolved to uncover the truth, unaware of the dangers that awaited them. Every step they took would pull them deeper into a web of secrets, where the stakes were far higher than they could have imagined. The quiet town of Rivermist would never be the same. The air hung heavy with tension as Donald Trump's voice finally broke the silence, his words measured and deliberate. "Officer Hawkins," he began, his tone carrying a mix of curiosity and calculation, "you've come to me for help, but the question is, why should I help you?" The crowd leaned in, their collective breath held as Hawkins struggled to respond. Sweat trickled down his temple, his voice cracking as he stammered, because you've always stood up for law enforcement. I thought you'd understand." Trump's gaze shifted momentarily to the protesters at the gates, their chants growing louder, a drumbeat of defiance. Among them, Malik Johnson locked eyes with Hawkins, his expression a storm of anger and grief. Behind Malik, a young woman with a megaphone stepped forward. Her name was Aisha Carter, a community organizer who had risen to prominence during the protests. Her voice rang out, cutting through the humid air. "We're not here for apologies. We're here for accountability." Her words electrified the crowd, their chants swelling in response. Meanwhile, Saracen, standing at the edge of the lawn, adjusted her camera lens, capturing every detail. She wasn't just a journalist, she was a storyteller, and she knew this moment was bigger than a disgraced cop or a former president. Her instincts told her there was more beneath the surface, something systemic, something hidden. Her investigation had already uncovered whispers of a secret initiative linking law enforcement agencies to private contractors with ties to political elites. This, she suspected, was just the tip of the iceberg. Inside Mar-a-Lago, the tension was palpable. Watching the scene from a balcony above was Ivanka Trump, her expression inscrutable. She had distanced herself from her father's political life, but something about this situation had drawn her back. Beside her stood a man in a tailored suit, his presence almost too polished for the chaotic scene below. He was Daniel Roth, a high-powered attorney with a reputation for making problems disappear. His whispered words to Ivanka suggested he was already calculating the potential fallout and the opportunities. As the protesters' voices rose, Hawkins dropped to his knees, his desperation spilling over. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse, "I've lost everything. My family, my career. I just want a chance to make things right." Trump's expression softened for a brief moment, but whether it was genuine or performative was impossible to tell. "Making things right," he said slowly, "isn't about what you say here today. It's about what you do next." His words hung in the air, ambiguous and heavy with implication. At the gates, Malik turned to Aisha, his voice low but resolute. "This isn't just about my son," he said. "It's about every family that's been torn apart by this system." Aisha nodded, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Then we keep fighting," she replied. "But we need to be smart. This isn't just a battle, it's a war." Her words carried the weight of someone who had seen too many promises broken, too many lives destroyed. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn, the scene felt like the calm before a storm. Unseen forces were already in motion, alliances forming and breaking in real time. Hawkins' plea, Trump's enigmatic response, Malik's determination, and Sarah's relentless pursuit of the truth were all threads in a tapestry that would soon unravel, revealing a nation on the brink of transformation. The air seemed to thicken as Donald Trump's lips parted, his voice cutting through the tense silence like the first crack of thunder before a storm. "You want my help?" Hawkins flinched. The crowd leaned in, the hum of their anticipation almost audible. Hawkins nodded, his throat too dry to speak. For a man who had once wielded authority with unquestioned confidence, his desperation now was palpable, a stark contrast to the defiant chants echoing from the protesters at the gates. Trump's gaze shifted, lingering on Malik Johnson, whose presence radiated a quiet, unyielding strength. Malik's son still lay in a hospital bed, his future uncertain, and yet here he stood, resolute and unbroken. The former president's expression remained inscrutable, but a flicker of something, calculation, perhaps, crossed his face. Malik met his stare, unblinking, as if daring him to act with anything less than integrity. Between the two men stretched an invisible line, taut with the weight of unspoken grievances and the shared knowledge of the moment's significance. Meanwhile, Saracen, standing at the periphery of the crowd, felt her pulse quicken. She had spent months piecing together fragments of evidence that hinted at a broader conspiracy. The incident with Hawkins was just the tip of the iceberg, a single thread in a tapestry of systemic abuse and corruption. Her instincts told her this confrontation was no coincidence. Someone, somewhere, had orchestrated this meeting, and she intended to find out why. Her fingers itched to take notes, but instead, she observed, committing every detail to memory. The stakes were too high for carelessness. As the confrontation unfolded, the protesters' chants grew louder, their voices a rhythmic drumbeat of defiance. Among them, Malik's wife, Angela, held a sign that read, "Justice for All." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her grip on the sign was firm, unwavering. She had spent countless nights by her son's bedside, her heart breaking with every labored breath he took. Now, she stood as a symbol of resilience, her presence amplifying the collective pain and hope of the crowd. For her, this wasn't just about her son, it was about every family that had suffered in silence. Trump's voice broke through again, this time sharper, more direct. "You think I owe you something?" Hawkins, his words a challenge as much as a question. Hawkins hesitated, his mind racing. He had come seeking a lifeline, but now he realized the cost of Trump's aid might be more than he was willing to pay. The former officer's internal conflict was evident in the way his hands fidgeted, his eyes darting between Trump and the protesters. Redemption, he realized, would not come easily, or without sacrifice. Unnoticed by most, a sleek black SUV pulled up near the estate's entrance. Inside sat a man in a tailored suit, his face obscured by dark sunglasses. He watched the scene unfold with an air of detached interest, his presence a silent reminder that power often lurked in the shadows. Sarah caught sight of the vehicle and felt a shiver run down her spine. Whoever this man was, he didn't belong to the crowd, and his arrival added yet another layer of intrigue to an already volatile situation. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawn. The protesters' chants seemed to merge with the distant hum of cicadas, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. As the tension reached its breaking point, Malik took a step forward, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "This isn't just about my son," he said, addressing Trump, Hawkins, and the crowd all at once. "This is about accountability. About justice. And about change." His words hung in the air, a declaration of purpose that demanded a response. In that moment, the confrontation transcended the individuals involved, becoming a microcosm of the nation's struggles. The choices made here would ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the confines of Mar-a-Lago. And as the first stars began to pierce the twilight sky, it became clear that the story was far from over. The battle lines had been drawn, and the fight for truth and justice was just beginning. The air was thick with tension as Donald Trump finally broke his silence, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to commanding attention. His words, measured and deliberate, were not what anyone expected. Rather than offering Hawkins immediate absolution or condemnation, Trump posed a question that hung in the humid air like a thundercloud. What are you willing to sacrifice to make this right? The former president's tone was inscrutable, leaving Hawkins visibly shaken, his desperation now mingled with confusion. The crowd leaned in, their collective breath held, as if the answer might somehow determine their own fates. Malik Johnson, standing at the gates with the protesters, felt a surge of anger at the spectacle unfolding before him. To him, this was no moment for theatrics or redemption arcs. It was about justice for his son, who remained hospitalized and fighting to recover. Yet, as he locked eyes with Hawkins from across the lawn, something unexpected stirred within him. It wasn't forgiveness, but a grim recognition of the brokenness in the man who had caused his family so much pain. Malik clenched his fists, silently vowing that no matter what unfolded here, he would ensure the system itself was held accountable. Meanwhile, Sarachan observed the scene with sharp focus, her journalist's instincts kicking into overdrive. She had been following the story for weeks, but something about Trump's cryptic response piqued her curiosity. It wasn't just about Hawkins anymore, there was a larger game at play, and she intended to uncover it. Her mind raced as she mentally catalogued the players in this unfolding drama, each a thread in what she suspected was a much larger tapestry of influence and corruption. She knew this moment was only the beginning, a spark that would ignite a firestorm of revelations. As the sun emerged from behind the drifting cloud, its light illuminated Hawkins' face, etched with years of internal conflict now laid bare. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the enormity of his actions, not just the assault on the teenager but the role he had played in perpetuating a system that allowed such abuses to thrive. His voice, trembling but resolute, broke the silence. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said, his words carrying a weight that hinted at a man on the brink of transformation. The crowd murmured, unsure whether to believe him or dismiss his plea as self-serving. Trump's gaze shifted back to the protesters, his expression unreadable. "We'll see," he said, turning abruptly and walking toward the estate, leaving Hawkins standing alone in the oppressive heat. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of reactions, some jeering, others shouting demands for justice. Malik remained rooted in place, his eyes fixed on Hawkins, who now seemed smaller, almost spectral, against the grandeur of Mar-a-Lago. It was clear to Malik that the fight for justice would not end here. This was merely the prologue to a much larger battle. As the protesters began to disperse, Sarah approached Malik, her notebook in hand. "I think there's more to this than meets the eye," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Malik nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then let's make sure the truth comes out," he replied. Their unlikely alliance, born of shared purpose, would become a driving force in the events to come. The stage was now set for a collision of ideals, ambitions, and truths that would ripple far beyond the manicured lawns of Mar-a-Lago. Each character, from Hawkins to Malik to Sarah, stood at a crossroads, their choices bound to intersect in ways none of them could yet foresee. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, its golden light cast long shadows over the estate, a fitting metaphor for the reckoning that awaited them all. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as Donald Trump finally broke his silence, his voice cutting through the heavy July air with a tone that was neither warm nor dismissive. "You're asking for mercy," he said, his gaze locking onto James Hawkins, "but mercy isn't free. It comes with a price." The former president's words hung in the air, cryptic yet deliberate, leaving Hawkins visibly shaken. Trump's reputation for transactional dealings was well known, and the officer knew this encounter would not end with simple forgiveness. Beyond the gates, Malik Johnson clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing as he watched the exchange. He had come not for spectacle but for answers, for accountability. The sight of Hawkins groveling stirred no satisfaction in him, only a deep, simmering anger at a system that had allowed this moment to exist at all. Beside him, his wife, Angela, placed a hand on his arm, a quiet reminder to stay composed. Their son's recovery was far from assured, and the fight for justice had only just begun. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen's sharp eyes darted between the players on this stage. Her instincts told her there was more to this than met the eye. The way Trump's words carried hidden weight, the unease in Hawkins' posture, and the subtle movements of Trump's security detail, it all hinted at something larger brewing beneath the surface. She discreetly activated the recorder in her pocket, determined to capture every nuance of this moment. Her investigation had already uncovered whispers of a shadowy network protecting officers like Hawkins, and she suspected this confrontation was just the tip of the iceberg. As the sun re-emerged from behind the cloud, its light glinting off the estate's gilded windows, a new figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was Senator Evelyn Torres, a rising political star and vocal advocate for police reform. Her unexpected presence sent a ripple through the gathering. Torres had built her career on holding those in power accountable, and her arrival here was no coincidence. She approached Malik and Angela, offering a quiet but firm assurance, "We're not letting this go. Not this time." Inside the gates, Hawkins' trembling voice broke the silence. "I'll do whatever it takes," he pleaded, desperation etched into every word. Trump's expression remained inscrutable, but a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "We'll see," he replied, turning to one of his aides. "Get him out of here. We'll talk later." The officer was swiftly escorted away, his fate now tethered to forces far beyond his control. The protesters' chants grew louder, their voices swelling with renewed energy as Senator Torres stepped up to address them. Her words were a balm to the crowd's frustration, but they also carried a warning: this is just the beginning. The fight ahead will test us all. Her speech galvanized the crowd, but Sarah Chen's attention was elsewhere. She had caught a fleeting exchange of glances between Trump and one of his advisors, a look that spoke of secrets yet to be revealed. As the gathering began to disperse, the scent of jasmine lingered in the air, deceptively calming. Sarah lingered, her mind racing with connections yet to be made. Malik and Angela walked away hand in hand, their resolve unshaken despite the uncertainty ahead. And within the walls of Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump retreated to his private quarters, his mind already calculating his next move. The stage was set, but the players had yet to realize the full scope of the game they were now a part of. The July sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of Mar-a-Lago. Officer James Hawkins, still trembling, felt the weight of his predicament settle deeper into his chest. Donald Trump, unmoving and inscrutable, finally broke the silence. His voice, measured yet tinged with an edge of calculation, sliced through the tension. "You're asking for something you don't deserve," he said, his words heavy with implication. Hawkins flinched, his desperation teetering on the brink of collapse. Behind the gates, the chants of protesters grew louder, their voices a relentless reminder of the consequences of his actions. Malik Johnson, standing amidst the crowd, clenched his fists as he watched the scene unfold. His son lay in a hospital bed, his future uncertain, and yet here was the man responsible, begging for a lifeline. Malik's pain was raw, but it was his resolve that burned brighter. He had become a reluctant leader in a movement that demanded accountability, not just for his son but for countless others. The crowd around him swelled, their collective anger and hope a palpable force. Yet Malik knew the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, from legal battles to the ever-present threat of retaliation against those who dared to challenge the system. Saracen, standing at the edge of the crowd, felt her pulse quicken. Her investigation had already uncovered troubling links between Hawkins' precinct and a shadowy network of political operatives. What began as a story about police misconduct was rapidly evolving into something far more sinister. She had unearthed whispers of a cover-up, implicating figures in law enforcement and beyond. But the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous her work became. Threatening emails had begun to flood her inbox, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Still, she pressed on, determined to expose the rot at the heart of the system. Inside the estate, Trump's gaze shifted momentarily to an aide who lingered nearby, their whispered exchange too quiet to be overheard. Hawkins, sensing the former president's hesitation, seized the moment. "Please," he rasped, his voice cracking. "I'll do anything. Just help me." The words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the defiant cries of the protesters outside. Trump's expression hardened, and he leaned in slightly, his tone low but firm. "Anything," he repeated, as though testing the weight of the word. Hawkins nodded, his face a mask of regret and fear. Whatever bargain was being struck, its implications would ripple far beyond this moment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the protesters lit candles, their flames flickering in the growing darkness. Malik stepped forward, his voice rising above the din. "We won't stop," he declared, his words carrying the weight of a promise. The crowd erupted in agreement, their chants echoing into the night. Sarah, notebook in hand, captured every detail, knowing this moment would be pivotal in the narrative she was weaving. But even as she documented the scene, her thoughts were already racing ahead, piecing together the disparate threads of a story that seemed to grow more complex with each passing day. Unseen by most, a black SUV idled just beyond the estate's gates. Inside, a figure watched the proceedings with keen interest, their expression unreadable. They were neither protester nor ally, but their presence hinted at forces working behind the scenes, manipulating events for their own ends. As the SUV pulled away, its taillights vanishing into the night, it became clear that the challenges ahead would not be limited to the courtroom or the streets. The battle for justice was about to collide with a labyrinth of power, secrets, and betrayal that no one had fully anticipated. The sweltering July heat seemed to press down on the gathering at Mar-a-Lago as Donald Trump finally broke his silence. His voice, steady and deliberate, cut through the tension. "Officer Hawkins," he began, "you've come here seeking mercy, but mercy isn't mine to give. It belongs to the people you've wronged." His words hung in the air, a challenge to the disgraced officer and a signal to the crowd that this moment was larger than any one man. Hawkins, visibly shaken, lowered his gaze, the weight of his actions and their consequences finally sinking in. Malik Johnson, standing just beyond the gates, stepped forward with unexpected resolve. "Mercy isn't enough," he called out, his voice carrying over the chants of the protesters. "We need accountability. We need change." His words ignited a ripple through the crowd, their chants growing louder, more unified. Saracen, notebook in hand, captured every detail, her mind racing with connections between this moment and the broader web of corruption she had been unraveling for months. She knew this was no longer just a story, it was a turning point. As the confrontation unfolded, Trump's expression shifted. For the first time, there was a flicker of something unexpected, introspection. "You're right," he said, addressing Malik directly. "This nation is broken in ways we've refused to see. But fixing it? That's not just on leaders or cops. It's on all of us." The crowd murmured in surprise, unsure of his sincerity but aware that his words carried weight. For Sarah, the moment was electric. She resolved to hold him to that statement, knowing her investigation could expose the systemic failures that had allowed such injustices to persist. Officer Hawkins, his voice cracking, finally spoke. "I can't undo what I've done," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "But I can make it right. I'll testify. I'll expose everything I know about the system that let me get away with it for so long." His confession sent shockwaves through the crowd, a rare moment of accountability from someone who had once embodied the worst abuses of power. Malik, though still grieving, nodded solemnly. "It's a start," he said, his tone heavy with both pain and cautious hope. In the weeks that followed, Hawkins' testimony would lead to the indictment of several high-ranking officials, shaking the foundations of law enforcement and political institutions across the country. Malik Johnson became a leading voice in the fight for police reform, his advocacy inspiring legislation that would bring tangible change. Sarah Chen's exposé, published in a series of groundbreaking articles, revealed the depth of the corruption and galvanized a movement that transcended party lines. As for Trump, his role in this saga remained controversial. Some saw his words as a calculated move to regain relevance, while others viewed them as a genuine acknowledgement of the nation's flaws. Regardless, his unexpected pivot forced a national conversation about leadership and responsibility. The jasmine-scented breeze that had once seemed incongruous became a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, change was possible. This story is not just about one man's redemption or another's quest for justice. It is about a nation at a crossroads, grappling with its past and daring to envision a better future. Now is the time to act, demand accountability, push for systemic reform, and refuse to let history repeat itself. The call to justice is clear. Will you answer it? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the manicured lawn of Mar-a-Lago, the events of that fateful July afternoon began to ripple outward, touching the lives of all who had been present. Officer James Hawkins, once a man defined by his badge and authority, embarked on a journey of reckoning that would strip him of his illusions and force him to confront the prejudices he had long ignored. His public fall from grace became a symbol of accountability, but it was his private struggle to rebuild his humanity that would resonate most deeply. Through court-mandated programs and heartfelt dialogues with those he once dismissed, Hawkins began to understand the pain he had inflicted and the systemic forces that had shaped him. Malik Johnson, the father of the injured teenager, emerged as a beacon of resilience and leadership. Refusing to let his son's suffering be reduced to a fleeting headline, he channeled his grief into purpose. Johnson became a central figure in the burgeoning movement for police reform, galvanizing communities across the country. His speeches, raw and unfiltered, laid bare the generational wounds inflicted by systemic racism while offering a vision of hope rooted in unity and action. His efforts culminated in the passage of the Justice and Accountability Act, a landmark piece of legislation that redefined law enforcement practices and introduced sweeping reforms. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen's investigation into the deeper layers of corruption surrounding the incident uncovered a labyrinth of deceit that implicated high-ranking officials in both law enforcement and politics. Her tenacity and refusal to be silenced earned her both allies and enemies, but it was her unwavering commitment to the truth that ultimately brought those in power to their knees. Chen's exposé not only earned her a Pulitzer Prize but also inspired a new generation of journalists to pursue stories that challenged the status quo. Her work served as a reminder of the press's vital role in holding institutions accountable and amplifying the voices of the marginalized. And then there was Donald Trump, whose unexpected involvement in this saga defied easy categorization. While many had dismissed him as a relic of a bygone era, his decision to publicly condemn the actions of Officer Hawkins and call for police reform shocked both his supporters and detractors. Whether motivated by genuine conviction or calculated self-interest, Trump's statement became a turning point in the national conversation. For some, it was a vindication of their belief in his ability to evolve. For others, it was a bitter reminder of his polarizing legacy. Regardless, his words added a layer of complexity to a narrative already brimming with moral ambiguity. As the year unfolded, the events sparked by that July afternoon became a case study in the power of individual actions to ignite collective change. The protests grew into a sustained movement, bridging divides and fostering dialogue in communities long fractured by mistrust. It was not a perfect transformation, progress rarely is, but it was a beginning. Now, the question falls to us. Will we, as a society, continue to confront the uncomfortable truths laid bare by this story? Will we commit to the hard work of dismantling systemic inequities and building a more just future? The answers lie not in the actions of a few but in the choices we make every day. Let this tale serve as both a cautionary reminder and a call to action. Justice is not inevitable, it is earned. The shadows of the past may linger, but the light of change is within reach, if only we dare to grasp it.